Okay, so today I'm going to be reviewing the proposition that says purchase limits on quantities of gun-related products would limit harms more than an outright ban on guns. And this proposition was supported by three secondary claims. The first one is current gun laws and bans fail to prevent mass shootings. Number two, gun bans negatively impact law-abiding gun owners. And number three, many shootings happen in a similar fashion, and more specific laws could have prevented them. And today, my main claim is that after analysis, the information is found to be misleading and insufficient to prove that a limit to purchases of gun-related products would limit harm at all. And I will now move on to analyze the advocate's first supporting claim, in which he states, current gun laws and bans fail to prevent mass shootings. And there is an inferential leap there is an assumption that gun control is meant to prevent mass shootings. And according to the Gun Control Act, Title 18, the United States Code of Firearms, Chapter 14, Section 101, it states, the purpose of this title is to provide support to federal, state, and local law enforcement officials in their fight against crime and violence. So crime is always going to be around, violence is always going to be there. So it's not meant to prevent it, but rather keep it at a minimum. And although the purpose of gun control is not to prevent mass shootings, it does prove to be effective by reducing the amount of deaths that do happen by guns. According to NPR.org, between 1993 and 2000, the gun homicide rate dropped by nearly half, and since then it's been relatively flat. From 2009 to 2014, the number has hovered around 11,000 to 12,000 deaths per year. Now moving on to the second point, which was gun bans negatively impact law-abiding gun owners. And he provided some supporting examples which I think are relevant to this point. And he stated that those that truly want to own a gun for self-defense and sport will be willing to go through more vigorous training courses and background checks. This doesn't seem negative, because as far as the training goes, that only benefits them with their skills in handling a gun. And background checks aren't negative either, because not only are they used when you acquire a job, so I don't see the negative part in a background check. In fact, background checks are common, like I said, when acquiring a job. So considering the risk of having a gun, they actually do prevent them from falling into the wrong hands. And according to Webster and Garen Whitmute in a 2015 meta-analysis, they found that expanding the background checks do have protective effects against lethal violence, and they help curb or diminish the murders and suicides with the guns. And moving on to his third point, in which he says, many shootings are conducted in a similar fashion and more specific laws could have prevented them. Earlier in his speech, he said that he used a point to support his first claim. And this point was, someone who is willing to kill multiple civilians will have little respect for the law and will circumvent it. Well, these more specific laws are also laws, and criminals break laws. So what's special about these laws that will have an effect on the mass shootings? He also mentions earlier in his speech as support for another point, in which he states that Jalen Freiberg, a teenager, stole a gun from his parents and killed and murdered 4 students. And again, criminals break the law. So implementing more laws that are more specific will not have an effect on these mass shootings, when they can just go out and steal more guns or steal them. They don't have to necessarily purchase them to go out there and perform a mass shooting. As you can see, the information is flawed and is insufficient to provide enough evidence and to prove that the limit to purchasing guns and related products would limit harm at all. Thank you.
All right, well, you started off identifying the main proposition and the secondary points, so structurally it should be pretty clear. But as you go through each of those points, it sounds mostly like you're just summarizing what the advocate said on these points. I don't really hear any analysis of why their argument is wrong or why it's irrelevant to the point that was being presented. And sometimes I thought that the advocate's argument was a little bit confusing, but this is almost equally confusing. For example, you've got a statistic in here that talks about the number of gun deaths declining between 93 and 2000 and then staying relatively flat from 11 to 12,000 a year. And I'm going, okay, well, that's good information. What inference am I supposed to draw from this? Is this because there was some sort of gun control legislation that was put into place and you're saying it was effective? Or are you saying that regardless of what laws exist, that we're going to get this particular rate that's happening? So how does that prove your particular point? I don't know. It's a nice piece of information, but how it's being used here is not very clear to me. On the second point, I think you've got a reasonable press here that says, well, there's nothing wrong with having rigorous background and training. That's an advantage to whoever the purchaser is. And I can see that that's a legitimate point. I think that it would be helpful to have some information that showed why having those things is beneficial, but showing that there's no negative consequence is a good way to begin. And then you've got one vague piece of evidence that says expanded background checks do help. So that's the closest you get to anything that suggests a contrary position to what the advocate was taking, which I'm not sure actually addresses what their main point is, but because, like I said, I was a little bit confused on the original argument and how those secondary points supported the main point. The third point sounds like you've just summarized what the advocate said again, and you don't really take issue with it or do anything except describe what it is that they said. So, I'm not sure how you see that there'd be a flaw in their argument. All you did was describe their argument, and then you said it's flawed. And I'm going, and in what way is it flawed? So I think you need to be making more inferences in your argument. I think there's a lot of description of what the claims were presented by the other side, but there's not a lot of inference or declarative sentences about why that is wrong or problematic, or giving us a counter reason to suggest to believe something that is different than that. So I think that that's a little problematic. All right, thank you.